Chapter 11. The Full Moon Gathering. As the day dragged on, the sun flung its way across the sky, barely peeking above the horizon, setting the air ethereal shades of orange and pink. The front of the palace was laden with flowers and servants at the ready to tend to the arriving dignitaries and council members from around the country. Cameron stood in front of her vanity in her room, smoothing out her dress as she got ready for the night's festivities. As she slipped on her bangles and adjusted her earrings and posture, she looked out through the window, staring at the oncoming barrage of carriages pulling up to the front gates. "She's probably there already," she said scornfully, as a disgusted look stretched across her face. "You got this, Cameron. Just stay away from her. Keep an eye on Kev, and everything should be fine," she said, looking at her reflection with a hopeful smile. "We just have to get through the night." As she forced herself to smile, a brief flash of pain cascaded over her face. She quickly gathered herself and walked towards the door. Her 3-inch heels pitter-pattered against the ground as she walked down the looming hallway. Keviar ran through her mind as she walked towards his room. Since yesterday, it's like he's been on his toes and hyper-fixated on something. But what? "Miss Cameron," a pair of guards said, bowing as she walked past them. "Oh, good evening," she said, slightly lowering her head. "Do you know if he's ready?" she asked them, walking up to Keviar's door, which they stood guard. "We aren't sure, miss," they replied. "Seriously," she said, sighing. "Kev, you ready?" she yelled, knocking on the door. "Yeah, I was waiting on you," he said, suddenly opening the door as her knuckles fell on his shoulder. "Oh, you're ready," she said, confused and astounded. "I thought you'd be on the balcony in your underwear again like last year," she said, chuckling. "You just love embarrassing me, huh?" he asked, sliding the door close as the guards behind them tried to hold in their laughs. "Well, I'm just saying," she said, trying to laugh off her suspicions. "Well, for your information, I'm just excited for the gathering this year," he said as the two of them walked down the hallway. "Since when?" she asked. "Yesterday you told me it's boring and even did a pretty good impression of Raph." Well, I changed my mind," he said, nervously rubbing his neck. "Okay. So, do you know if the guests arrived yet?" he asked. "I saw some carriages coming up to the gate, but they should all be in the hall already," she replied. "There you two are," Johann said, startling them as they turned a corner. "Sir Raphael and your father are waiting for you." "Okay, thanks, Johann," Cameron said. As they entered the small room off the side of the main dining hall, Raphael stood propped up against the wall in his formal attire. His eyes were still covered by the loose strands of hair on his face. "Okay, good. We're all here," Dante said as they entered. "Something wrong, Dad?" Cameron asked. No, just glad to have you all here," he said, smiling as a picture of the late Queen hung above his head looking down on them. "Okay, remember exactly as we practiced yesterday, and once the gathering has begun, avoid any questions about the division or the East Agricultural Fields," he said, seriously. "Okay," they all said. "Besides that, try and have fun, all right?" he said, extending his arms as he moved in for a hug. "All right, Dad, we'll do our best," Keviar said as he and Cameron walked up to join his hug. "Come on, Raph," Keviar said, motioning him over with his hand. "Yeah, come on, Raph," Cameron said, pulling him over to join in the group hug. All right," he said dryly, slightly smiling. "I love you all," Dante said, a tear slipping out of his eye. Break. "Mother, when is this going to start?" a young woman from the congregation asked as she fanned herself. The dining hall was decorated from floor to ceiling with ornate flowers and red streamers with gold embroidery. The round tables encircled the main table, which stood higher than the others. The silken tablecloths draped to the floor as council members sporting their distinctive pins found their place at the main table, leaving 6 seats open. "Soon, dear. Just take in all the decor. It's beautiful, isn't it?" Our servants could do better, she replied as she continued to fan herself. Suddenly the lights around the room dimmed as Johann emerged from amidst the crowd slowly trickling into their seats. "Good evening, everyone," he yelled, his voice echoing throughout the venue. The noise grew ever so silent as he continued to talk. "I hope everyone's travels to tonight's gathering were pleasant and filled with good fortune," he continued. "Before I introduce myself and the guests of honor, I would like to invite any remaining council members from the crowd up to the main table," he said, looking around the room. His posture and slicked back hair were flawless and unwavering in front of the 50-odd guests. "Oh, that's me," a dark-skinned man from the back of the room said. His colorful garments were littered with unique patterns and prints that clashed with the room. "Sorry about that," he said, making his way up to the table. "Uncle's here," Keviar whispered as he peeked through the small crease in the door from outside. "Kev, come on, get in line. They're about to start," Cameron said, pulling him off the door into a single-file line behind her. "Okay. And with that, thank you for attending the full moon gathering this year. My name is Kajo Johann," he said, addressing the crowd again. "Now rise to your feet and allow me to introduce the first prince of Kain, Oritsue Raphael," he yelped, gesturing to the door as it slowly opened. "Looks like I'm up," Raphael said, his deep monotone voice shaking the ground. The crowd clapped as he walked regally into the room towards the main table, gently waving at the people, his posture wavering ever so often as he tried his best to show that he cared to be there. "Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Princess of Kain, Oritsue Cameron." As she entered the room, her eyes glistened, greeting the crowd with an endearing smile. She held her dress as the skirt swept the ground, walking towards her seat. "And now, meet the second Prince of Kain, Oritsue Keviar." As he walked, his eyes darted towards the main table with the council members, where Akari should be, but her seat stood empty. "And finally, His Majesty Oritsue Tenshi Dante II," Johann said, as the doors flung open and Dante entered, regally greeting the people as a king would. "Where's Akari?" Kev asked as he stood next to Cameron looking over at the empty seat. "I don't know, but hush," she said, elbowing him. As Keviar fidgeted with his clothes, their father joined them, standing in the middle of the room as they all stood with bated breath at his next word. "Thank you, Johann, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Please take your seats," Dante said, sitting back in his chair as the audience settled into their seats. "I am truly honored to have everyone here to discuss the state of our beloved country and the upcoming Founding Day celebration," he continued to say. "But first, I would like the council to introduce themselves and their position to the congregation," he said, gesturing to the members seated at the table. "I guess I'll go first then," said the dark-skinned man from earlier as he stood up. "My name is Ubuntu Akan, and I am the Minister of the Judiciary Office." His chiseled features, paired with his direct, raspy voice and dreadlocks, were the only ones in the room. However, he commanded respect, and those around him looked up at him in reverence. "My name is Kanke Hiknon," another man said, standing up. A slight accent slipped out through his introduction. "I am the Minister of Foreign Affairs." "Good evening, everyone. I am Guntai Fortis, head of the Kain military," a broad-shouldered, towering man at the end of the table said as he stood up. "And I am Kabith Hassan, head of financial affairs," Hassan said. "Oh, it appears that the head of the Citizens Board and head priestess of the clergy, Inoru Akari, could not be here this evening," Dante said, looking over at the empty seat. "Despite her absence, we will continue," he continued. "Thank you for the introductions, all of you. We can now start this meeting. Leaders of the 4 districts may now ask questions or inquire about prominent issues," Dante said, neatly folding his hands. "Yes, Your Majesty," a small man to the far right of the room said, leader of the western fishing village, Li Lo. "Yes, go ahead." "Thank you. I'm here to raise the issue of the recent decline of fish from the entire western coast. Fishing vessels have been returning empty more since the year started, and the village is experiencing a food shortage," he said, reading from the small pad he held in his hand. "What do you suggest we do about this?" "This is a persistent issue that was also raised at last year's gathering, and I will provide the same answer I did last year," Dante replied. "We must reconvene with the international representative of Eniaa to receive permission to fish in their waters." "Thank you," the representative responded, scribbling in his pad before sitting down. "Yes, Your Highness. We in the eastern fields have been experiencing severe droughts and diseased crops increasingly from the past 2 years," another man said. "I hear your concerns, and I assure you this is a top priority for all ministers and leaders," Dante said sternly. "We are working on employing more earth users from Niloa to assist in the efforts to combat the spreading diseases and weeds," he continued. "Your Majesty, permission to speak," a woman said, standing up. "Yes, of course, go ahead." "I'm here from the Citizens Coalition, and we in the Northern Village ask that you do something about the Non-User Rights Movement, or NURM as they like to call themselves. Countless protests have turned violent in recent months, and I fear for my safety." "What do you suggest?" Dante asked as he wrote down on a pad in front of him. "Please meet with NURM leader Oscar Remy. His violent ideology puts us all at risk as more and more non-users join his cause," the woman replied. "I assure you the council and I will do what we can. However, the priestess would usually handle such affairs. But we will do what we can. Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Dante said. "Your Majesty," a woman said, standing up. "Yes." Following the conversation about non-users with the Citizens Coalition leader, I'd like to raise the problem in the Eastern Village. For several weeks now, we have been experiencing multiple abductions and missing persons along the forest path to the Northern Village. I've been briefed on this issue, but I was unaware of its severity. "What do you suggest, Representative?" Dante asked. "I raised the possibility of extending the railway from the north to encompass passenger travel from the Eastern Village," the representative explained. "I was under the impression that this railway was already being constructed," Dante said, confused. "Your Majesty is right. There is a railway from the east to the north, however. They are not suitable for passenger travel, as they were built for better shipment of mined crystals and raw materials," she said. "I see," Dante replied, stroking his goatee. "I assure you I will reconvene with the council and see what can be done about this railway." "Dang, Dad's good," Caviar whispered to Cameron. "Shh," she said, looking over at him. "And what of the division? Has there been any reconciliation?" he asked the woman. "I'm afraid matters have only gotten worse, Your Majesty," she replied. "The division between users and non-users has only increased, and like the coalition leader brought up, with the ensuing violence and strange abductions, it keeps getting worse." "I concur with the East Village representative," a man said, standing up suddenly. "Violence has been spiking since the beginning of the year in the Western Village and capital city as well," the man continued. "Non-users accuse users of sparking the violence, and retaliation is tenfold," the Eastern representative continued, "and the impending food shortage has everyone on high alert." "This is truly devastating news," Dante said, holding his head. "Of course." "Did you say something, Okane Kasumi?" Dante asked as her voice reverberated throughout the room. "Our apologies, Your Majesty," her mother said, slightly bowing. "Great, she's starting already," Cameron said sarcastically under her breath. "Given the issues addressed by the Eastern Village representative," he said, addressing the woman, Do you think Okana Corp could fund the passenger rail expansion project to the east, seeing as they mine your crystals? I'm sure we could work out a deal with our attorneys, she said, her purple gown flopping to the floor as she stood up. Wonderful, thank you, Miss Okane, he replied. Are there any other issues that need to be acknowledged? He asked. Your Majesty, Hassan said, standing up. Yes, Hassan, he said as the room turned towards him. I have some urgent news that everyone should be aware of, he said. With the absence of council member Inoru Akari, I feel it imperative I be the one to share. In light of the conversation with the Eastern representative, earlier this evening I received news from the village via Twitter, a non-user family of 5 who was abducted, he continued. Along with this, tensions have been mounting since the family's disappearance, and there are threats of turf wars brewing between users and non-users in the village. The room grew silent as everyone awkwardly stared at each other. This happened today? Dante asked, breaking the silence. Yes, Your Highness, Hassan replied. What has Cain come to? He said brokenly. This could mean civil war, Hassan said, finishing his sentence. If a civil war ensues in the village, crystal mining will grind to a halt, and food shortages will be the least of our problems, Dante said, as the impending dread fell upon him. I am sorry I did not know about this upon my arrival, Your Majesty, the representative said. I received it this evening before the gathering began, well after the representative was on her way to the palace. I am truly sorry, Your Majesty, Hassan said, bowing. I assure you this will personally be my top priority, Your Majesty. I will work closely with the Eastern representative to find possible solutions to this issue, he continued. Very well, but I would also like Hiknon to accompany you in finding a diplomatic solution, Dante said, as the room grew anxious. Non-users are always finding something to complain about, Kasumi said, playing with her hair. Sumi, be quiet, her mother said, slapping her hand. But mother, you know I'm right, she whispered back. If it weren't for them, we'd be better off. We can hear you, you know, Cameron blurted out. Cam, come on, this isn't the time, Keviar said, pulling on her arm. Cameron, do you have something to say? Dante asked, looking over at her. Yes, I do actually, she said, standing up. Okane Kasumi, do you have something you would like the entire court to hear? She asked. Yes, I do, Your Highness, Kasumi said, standing up, her dead gaze clashing with Cameron's murderous one. Throughout history, non-users have held countless insurrections and mass killings because of their oppression, as if users living their lives oppress their sorry existence, she said. And now, with these abductions, who is to say that they aren't doing this for attention to raise awareness for their so-called oppression again, she continued. How could you say that? Cameron said, slamming the table. Non-users are some of the most hard-working people in this country. They mine the very crystals your family used to build your insurmountable fortune. How could you accuse an entire demographic of people of being so malicious and thirsty for oppression that they would fabricate such instances? She asked, her voice slowly rising. You speak so highly of them, and yet, time and time again, these violent outbursts have only grown in recent years, Kasumi said, her voice steady and cunning. You let your money do the talking, but live one day in their shoes, and I bet you would be fighting for equality just like them, Cameron said. I won't even imagine stepping in their filthy shoes, but then again, neither would you. You've never been further than the capital city. How would you know of their life? All right, Dante snapped, his voice echoing through the room. Enough, both of you. Miss Okane, I expect you to have a higher degree of respect when you address a member of the royal family, Dante said, addressing her. And Cameron, I expect you to address a member of the Okane family, one of our nation's most influential families with decorum and pleasantry. I do not know the origins of your strife, however. I expect you to work out your grievances after the meeting has concluded, he said sternly. Yes, father. Yes, your majesty. Please, I beg of your forgiveness, your majesty, Mr. Okane said, standing up. Worry not. Now let us continue with the meeting, Dante said.